And although we can't provide you with a specific formula they use, we can talk about the criteria they use. So, I'm not sure if Les or Anthony's going
So this is actually going to be, I was on vacation for the last meeting, so Anthony prepared an excellent presentation in my absence.
You're handing over the baton
I figured
already?
since he has an excellent presentation prepared, we might as well let him take it away. I don't want to waste all
See
that
what
hard
he
work
has.
you put in.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I'm new, so I don't have any leg to stand on and push it back, so.
Well, I don't see any graphics about Happy Street and whatever.
to. Did we leave those out?
Yeah.
It's my first one, so give me.
Okay.
Oh, this one,
There you go. This is pretty close.
Alright, so we're gonna go through the different criteria used during a credit evaluation here. So a quick agenda, some background, what a bond rating is and why it's needed, what's reviewed during a credit rating, and then how Vallecitos is doing in that regard. And then we'll have time for questions, but as you have questions, feel free to proceed with those. So what is a bond? A bond is a long-term obligation that is long-term debt that's sold to investors. So when a government, they issue bonds to fund public infrastructure when there's a large project that requires significant capital investment. So when a bond is issued, government receives a large influx of cash, and then in return, pay that cash back to the investors with a set amount of time.
So, okay. That's some interesting.
Can you tell me how many bonds we have right now?
So we do have that information. This is
It's in there.
So we really have three types of debt right now. We have the 2015 refunding, which we just did in 2015. We have the 2008 loan and the 2012 loan. 2008 and 2012 are private placement loans, so those will be handled differently. The 2015, we actually went out and got a credit rating for that.
So we're gonna get to that in a while. Which ones we have out, or should I ask you now how much they're for?
I can tell you, it's so the 2015 refunding was for $45 million. There was a 2012 loan was $7.1 million, and the 2008, do you know how much that was?
That's UBSC?
Yeah,
Wasn't it?
it's not that much, because we only have like 63 million total, so the majority of it is in the refunding, which is
Oh, the $45 million bond, which saved us a bunch of money
Correct.
in interest, okay, so.
About $345,000 a year in interest is what that was estimated to save us.
And the timing seems to have been right, because now it's going back up.
Right.
So congratulations for getting the right timing there.
I can't take any credit for that. I wish I could.
That might?
No, it's actually gonna be all previous staff.
Really?
Yeah, they did a good job.
We'll send them your best.
given the opportunity.
What are
I'm
the
sure.
other two?
I was there for the data gathering and stuff, but it wasn't my
Well,
idea.
you got
It wasn't my
it,
idea.
you got the debt.
I got it.
Okay.
You let it part.
And what are the other two?
No,
45 million?
No, we have 45, one was 7.1, that was the 2012 loan, that was through Union Bank. And then there's a Bank of America loan for private placement in 2008, and I can look up how much that was for you, I don't remember.
And can you tell me the $45 million, the bond issued, it was for monies we've already taken. What do we do with those monies? Where we show those were spent? Is it Meadowlark? Is it the Twin Tanks? Is it both? And is there a portion you can tell me as to which goes to where?
So there's a story behind the whole thing, because the original debt was in 1998, and I think that was for the two reservoirs. Then we refunded it in 2005 or 7 for the Meadowlark facility, and then we refunded it again in 2015. And I think there's some other stuff in there besides just the reservoirs and the Meadowlark. The majority is for those projects.
Okay. So the majority of 45 million. Did it start out as 60 million and we paid it down?
I
or-
think it was like 20, in the 20s, 25 million maybe originally for the two tanks, 29, somewhere around there. I can look that up. I had all the information just the other day because we were talking about buying the property, and when we did that, I wanted to look up all this stuff too. So, because you asked if we had debt related to the property here, I can get you all that if you'd like. Easy.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, sorry.
Oh, no sweat. So a bond rating is a grade given to a bond that assesses its credit quality. So an independent rating agency will come in, look at our financial profile, and based on that, provide a determination of our ability to repay that debt to the investors.
And the agency that comes in to do that, who's paying them?
That's us. It's
So
a part
we
of
pay a bond agency to come in and rate us.
correct. And the reason we do that is because it makes our bonds more attractive to the investment community. So the primary users of this rating agency are the investors who are buying our debt. So a strong credit rating lets them know that we are a less risky investment.
Right.
So as a result of that, a safer investment requires a lower yield. So the end result for us is that we're paying less on the debt.
So the bond company that comes in, ABC company, whatever it is, really needs to stay at arm's length from staff so as to not swing their thoughts in any way.
Yes, they are an independent, separate company. And you don't necessarily always need a credit rating. It depends on the type of debt that you are issuing. So if you're in the market a lot, or if it's a small issuance or a direct placement, a credit rating might not be the best case. But if it's a situation where you're trying to attract investors to it, it's a high dollar amount, you're not in the market very often, a situation like that, then this can really help you attract your debt to those investors.
So Union Bank and B of A, those are direct, you said they're a different type of bond.
Direct placement.
Okay, direct placement bond.
Mhm.
So the credit rating isn't as important.
Not as important in those situations. I think the 2015 was a refunding that went out to the investment community. So that would be a situation where you would try to market your debt, essentially.
Because by refunding, you buy back the old stuff and issue new stuff. So you need the credit rating to do that, to strengthen the issue.
Thank you.
President Martin, can I ask a question?
Yeah, certainly, I'm sorry.
So the smaller ones with B of A and Union Bank were well before my time. So I'm kind of curious. You you said one of them was $7 million. We have 60 million in reserves. What was the discussion back then between staff and the board to why would you go get a loan for that when you kind of have the cash on hand? Like, what's the thought process there, and what was the discussion, if you remember?
So I'll have to make assumptions on this one as well, because
Okay.
it was right when I started working here. But I assume it would be to maintain reserve levels. I know they used it, and they had, what do they call them, when you issue the debt, you have to mark the projects for it. I forgot requisitions, I can't remember the name of it. But they marked the Rock Spring Sewer, the San Marcos Interceptors, the second phase of it, and a couple other sewer projects related to that. So the 7.1 was specifically for those projects to fund the continuing project, because they're already in construction. And I would have to assume it would just be to maintain reserve levels.
Okay, so it's just balancing a bunch of money.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if we were to do our 5-year plan, say, okay, we're gonna be low on days in cash or debt service coverage, or looking at that 5-year plan, they'd probably say we need a cash infusion at this point to keep our reserve levels where we need them. So 7.1 probably fit that number.
So
Yeah.
it's a-
And we may not have had 60 million back then, and that was a long
Right.
time ago.
Right, and it was
So-
2012.
Yeah.
2012.
Man, more.
It might have been more. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I wasn't here.
I can tell you that too,
Yeah.
as soon as I get my computer back up,
Okay.
or with the other stuff.
Okay,
Computer's
thanks.
down. Gee.
It wasn't connected to the internet, I couldn't get to the drive when you were asking me questions.
Thank you.
So there are 3 main rating agencies out there right now: S&P, Moody's, and Fitch. And I think between those 3 companies, they comprise about 95% of the market right now. While they all have the same objective of creating a grade for your debt, how they do it varies very slightly between the companies. Fitch did our last credit rating, so we're going to focus on what Fitch is looking at during their evaluations. So Fitch has 4 key rating drivers that they look at, and they're listed here, but we're going to go over all of them in more detail in the coming slides. But those 4 rating drivers are revenue defensibility, operating risks, financial profile, and asymmetric risk factors. And of these 4 rating drivers, financial profile is weighted the heaviest.
Asymmetric risk factors.
Yeah.
Explain that.
It's a fancy way of saying it can't help you, but it can hurt you. So if you're doing everything they require for this factor, you're not gonna gain any points because in their eyes, that's what you should be doing.
Okay.
If you're not doing it, it's a red flag and they will take away points in
It's a
there,
one-way street.
essentially, yeah.
Okay.
So the first key rating driver is revenue defensibility. So in this regard, they're looking at our ability to generate cash flow based on our legal framework. And you'll notice a theme throughout the slides. There are 4 rating drivers, and then within those there's 12 C's that comprise what they look at. So the first C is charges and rate affordability. So they're going to look at our rate approval process and our general relationship with the rate making body and provide an assessment on that. So local control over rate setting is considered credit positive, whereas a lengthy review process or a reluctance to set rates at where to adjust for increasing costs or extra external regulatory oversight, those could be looked at as credit negative. They're also going to look at our revenue structure. So most utilities have a fixed fee charge on top of a volumetric based charge. So utilities that have a higher portion of fixed fees of their total revenues are considered more credit positive because that fixed fee is more stable from year to year. So it's easier to project financial performance and that sort of thing. They're also going to look at our billing and collection measures. They'll review our policy on termination of service and determine if we act on that when we should. So how long do we let an account go before it triggers an effect of some kind. And lastly, they're going to look at affordability of our fees. And they're going to do that based on the median household income in the area. So they're going to calculate this on a national level, but they're also going to compare it for our peers because it can vary from location to location. The second C of revenue defensibility is community characteristics. Some of the things they're going to be looking at here is unemployment and employment data, poverty levels, the wealth of the community in regards to the median household income. And they're also going to be looking at our major employers. And what they're looking for here is a broad, diverse economic environment. So what they want to make sure is if there's an economic downturn in one sector, that your entire employment base isn't wiped out with that. They're also going to look at
So our primary employer, or education, college, Palomar, and the school system, that's our primary, that's our number one employer.
Mhm.
So that would stand to be well because there again, it's government charges.
Yeah.
But they don't just look within the district boundaries, they're looking kind of more regionally, because I would say probably 80% of the people who live in San Marcos don't work in San Marcos.
Yeah, that's correct. And they're also going to review our customer growth and concentration. So Fitch considers stable growth to be about 1%, and they consider that credit positive because that can, with stable growth at about 1%, you can predict financial performance and capital requirements. So if you have a customer base that's rapidly increasing, rapidly decreasing, it can put some stress on those projections, so it's harder to know where you're at from year to year. And they're also going to look at our customer concentration. Similar to employers, they want to make sure that we don't have any group of customers or any one customer that comprises too large of a percentage of our customer base. For the same reason, if they skip town, they're left holding the bag.
Makes sense?
So that was the first risk factor. The second risk factor is operating risks, and what they're looking at here is the predictability and volatility of our costs and our ability to manage that. The first C is cost of operations, and what they're really looking at here is our cost flexibility, our ability to minimize cost escalation. They're also going to review our capacity, our ability to service the demands, to maintain our existing facilities, and to invest in ongoing capital improvement. So they will actually come in, look at our capital improvement plan, and make sure we do have a plan to upkeep our infrastructure and to invest in new infrastructure. They'll go as far as to review our depreciation to our capital investment, because the thought there is if you're depreciating faster than you're investing, later on down the line, you're gonna have some aging infrastructure that's gonna require a lot of investment. With the elaborate analysis. So the third C of operating risk is compliance with environmental laws and regulations. They will review any regulatory enforcement that we've had. They'll review the events that led up to the enforcement, any corrective plan, the scope of that corrective plan, where we're at in that corrective plan, and the timeline for completion. And based on that, whether there's any negative impact on our ratepayers or our potential bondholders. They will also review our capital demands and debt burden, calculate some debt ratios, debt per capita and debt per customer, to assess the debt burden that is on our ratepayers. And they'll also look at our capital improvement and how that's funded. So utilities that use a combination of pay-as-you-go or reserves, along with debt, are viewed more favorably than utilities that just require debt to upgrade all their infrastructure. So the third key rating driver is financial profile, and this is the one that is weighed the heaviest out of the four. So what they're looking at here is coverage and financial performance. They will analyze our revenues, expenditures, and they'll compare that to our debt to gauge what our cash flow looks like. And they'll perform some sensitivity analysis on that cash flow. And what they're really trying to see is how much stress can we take before our cash flows get to the point where one of our ratios could get to the point where our ability to pay debt could be compromised. So they're stress testing our financial scenario. They're also going to review our revenues, expenditures, and how they relate to each other. So if our operating expenditures are continually outpacing our operating revenues, that could indicate that our rates are not sufficiently covering our costs. They're also going to review our cash and balance sheet, and this is really just a measure of our reserves. So they're going to look at our days of cash on hand, our days of working capital on hand, and determine how long we can maintain our existing operations with the reserves that we have on hand.
So the cash and balance sheet are basically part of the reserve.
Correct.
Okay, so it's not separate.
No.
The reserve is your reserve. That's just part of your reserve with those two things, I assume.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the fourth and last key rating driver is the asymmetric risk factors. Again, these are asymmetric because they won't help you, but they could potentially hurt you. So they're going to look at contingent and derivative obligations. So they're going to review our debt portfolio and see if we have any exposure. So do we have a high proportion of variable rate debt that could change from year to year, that sort of thing. They're also going to look at our covenants. So anytime we issue debt, we have some covenants with our bondholders, essentially a promise to them. So they'll get an idea of what covenants we've made with our bondholders and whether we've lived up to our end of the bargain with those. A common bond covenant is an additional bonds test. So that basically says we agree not to take out any new debt unless we have revenues to cover X% over your debt and this new debt. So it's just kind of a way to safeguard.
So are
their
we
investment.
currently operating under any of these covenants now? No.
Well, we have covenants, but we're in compliance with
Oh,
the
yeah, I
covenants.
thought you said under the covenants, yes, we're well, our covenants say 115%.
Okay.
So were we at 220? So we're well above our debt service coverage ratio.
And out of curiosity, because it's still in my mind, it's, on investment money, our $60 million, we get 2% if we're lucky.
1.93 last investment.
Almost 2%.
Almost.
Yeah.
We're getting there.
And that's just moving to the new system of doing it?
Yeah, well, so we're sending them $3 million a month, and we went from like 1.4, 1.35 to 1.45 returns up to 1.93 so far. So they're doing it.
Okay.
They're making progress.
So we're getting 2%, but we're spending how much on these bonds?
Well, I think our interest rate is 4.6 average if you average the three debts together.
So we're paying out twice as much as we're taking in. So it makes more sense to pay those off.
If possible, but you have to maintain your days of cash.
Yeah. but the big one coming up is what we're gonna owe PERS, cause that's gonna be 7%. That's the big one to pay off.
But it's also, on the grand scheme of things, it's a large number, but compared to the numbers that we were talking about earlier, 7 million, 29 million, it's
Yeah.
kinda tiny.
Yeah.
So it's feasible to pay it off
Yeah.
and not dig too deep into our reserves.
Which is what this whole meeting is about, really. Because I can sense a split in the decision-making process, so therefore this whole meeting is to help us understand, help me in particular understand that you just can't throw all your money at one thing. Good job.
You just have to manage it effectively so you can keep your good rating and you can afford to pay off your debt.
And this
But
is just
that-
more informational than anything
Between
else.
the three companies that do this, it kind of reminds me of the Better Business Bureau. You belong to the Better Business Bureau so that you get a good rating. If you don't belong to them, you don't get a good rating. So how often is it a mandate? You do this every year, every 2 years? As you said, you don't have to do it,
Yeah.
but you do it in case you're going out for a bond.
Right.
But that would be the time to do it.
So there's also requirements, I think I don't know if you've talked about them yet, or if they're coming up, as far as if there are major changes made, I think you're required to contact Fitch and say, look, we've had these changes, you might wanna do a surveillance of us. So in those, because we do have debt that they were involved in issuing and they rated that debt AA+, they wanna make sure that they stay on top of our rating.
So they do require you to let them know if anything big happens that could affect your financial picture. But they also, when you issue the debt, they come in and they do a full analysis. But you're
What
with
does
them.
that cost? And what is a full analysis? What does that entail? 17 people show up like the FBI, or one guy with his laptop?
Oh, I guess it would depend on the company, but a lot of this information they can get from our financial statements. So when they come in, they have a pretty good idea of where you might be. They will do interviews and ask for clarifying points and all that good stuff. But it's typically not a staff of more than 1 to 2 that I've seen in my experience.
And they spend a lot of time?
They get a lot of information from us, a lot of financial data.
It's a
and they
lot of
might-
data
And they can
requests.
just keep requesting to really look for it.
So there's a lot of one-on-one. They have to do their homework, but there's a lot of one-on-one.
A lot of it's, requesting it by email, you send them over, like they ask for managers' bios, stuff like that, you send that to them. And a lot of financial data too, so.
And what does it cost, ballpark?
It's a good question, let's find out what else we'll put on the list.
So
I mean, but is it like thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands?
Yeah, I really don't have any
No.
idea, but
Okay.
I can look to see what we paid Fitch last time they did it.
Okay.
I can check actually the surveillance and the full, rating that we did for 2015.
Yeah.
Do you know all the answers on what's on the warrant list and what it's for, by the way?
Do I know
Or
all
do I
of
have to
them?
start asking those questions again?
You can
So
ask them.
try not to.
Thank you.
If you notice, I haven't done it in a long time now.
You can.
But that's because I assumed that everybody knew
Yeah.
when they sent out a check who was going to.
So those all go through a thorough review process before they get on the warrants list to you, so they're vetted before they get there.
You know about it, or remember something.
Actually, it
Yeah,
goes
just-
from Dennis Bowman to Fabi to Debbie to Anthony to me, and then it goes to Glenn after that, so it goes through the whole chain.
Who actually sends the check?
Not me.
Is that you?
I don't physically sign them.
No, but it's a.
It's it's an electronic signature.
Who does the electronics, who authorizes the electronic signature to go on it?
I do.
Yeah,
That's the person you hold accountable for.
that's the guy. Yeah,
So
so if
if
anything goes
I
wrong,
print,
it's the guy.
I print the check. If they're
Who's
over,
have you got that?
if they're over 70 grand, they have to be manually signed by one person. We have 2 signatures on every check,
Right,
and over 70 grand has to be manually signed by one other person.
and that's you,
That's
and.
Ed. So they have 2 signatures. They have Glenn's and Ed's on them.
Oh, okay.
And if they're over 70 grand, Ed's disappears and he has to sign it by hand.
Oh,
It's a security setting we have.
that's very cool. But you're the person that
It hits print.
lets them have it. So you're the person that really needs to know what it's for. When I first started asking, I got a lot of grief years ago. And then suddenly staff started knowing what they were for. Like, yeah, you're signing for it. I don't even know what it's for, but you should.
Yeah.
But
So just to go back really briefly, when you issue the debt is when they do their full analysis, but you're pretty much arm in arm with them until that debt is paid off. So they will come back every couple of years and do surveillance on you, just to, not as in-depth as the initial analysis, but just to determine if anything has changed that would affect your credit rating.
So do we know the last time that we had Fisk give us a rating, do we know how much money we had in set aside?
How much we had set aside for debt?
How much we had?
Reserves?
Or in reserves, you're
Yeah,
talking.
how much we had in reserve?
Last time they did a surveillance was 2017. And
We had a year ago.
405 days of cash on hand. For that.
Okay, but 405 days of cash, that's the same as reserve? That's not the
well,
same.
the reserve balance would have determined that. So what that means is we had that reserve balance divided by the operating costs, and that'd be days in cash.
Okay.
I can actually have the reserve report open now. And if we go back to the 2012 reserve balance, before I change the thing here, it was $21.1 million. So when we did the budget for that year, we said, okay, we're budgeting, we're gonna be, $7 million less than that, so we plugged in $7 million.
So that makes sense now, why you would go out to debt, because you guys are 20 million, I mean, that's
Much
2/3
smaller.
less than we're at now.
Right.
So, makes sense.
And
And
then-
it's not uncommon, I mean, even in the private sector, companies, they carry a certain amount of cash on hand, but they also have carry a certain amount of debt.
Right.
And it's just part of the process, so.
If you're only at 20 million, it's probably a good idea with those projects.
Yeah.
The other thing you had asked about the balance of the loans, the 2008 was initially $8 million. The current balance is 5.1 as of 2017. The 2012 I said 7.1. The current balance of that was 4.4 as of 2017, June 30th. And then the 2015 we had right, it was $45 million.
The original or the outstanding balance?
The refunded 2015, it was 45 million, and there's a $6.6 million premium on there, so it's about 51 if you include that, which you should.
Premium.
When you refund it, because it's at a lower interest rate, you have to pay a premium on that. It's like if you were to buy a stock or an agency, like let's call it a stock. If you buy
Like an early prepayment penalty?
well, it's like buying something that's worth more than you want to pay for it. So if we buy agencies, for example, if it's got a face value of 2 and the current market rate is a 1.5, you're going to have to pay more for this one, because you're going to say, okay, I'm going to get a 2% return, market's only 1.5, I got to pay a premium to get that. The reverse happens if you're issuing debt. So we're issuing at a lower rate, so we have to pay a premium because we're saving on interest. In theory, that savings is still greater than the premium you're paying.
In theory.
Otherwise, you wouldn't do it. And ours is estimated to be $345,000 a year per year on the interest savings. So the now that I told you that, I can look at the 2017 balance if you'd like to know that for the reserves. Let's see, we're almost there. So June 30th report for the 2017 reserves were at $58.9 million.
And what they today?
$2.
June 30th, 2018, they were 68.4.
Wow.
Huh?
So $10 million for the plus.
That was before or after the water main breaks?
Before. It was a 4. Right? So yeah, now we can say they're like $12 million. No, I'm joking.
Excuse me just 1 second. The water main break on San Marcos and Rancho Santa Fe, they haven't put stone back in the ground.
They're
They
not,
just asphalt.
they're not going to, the city relieved us of that requirement. Took numerous meetings and a little arm twisting, but I think they did the right thing.
Well, I argued that I pointed out San Marcos Boulevard and
The Veracruz.
Veracruz. I pointed out that there are 2 sides of that now that have brickwork. If I remember, we had a problem. We had to tear it up, and the city didn't put brickwork back in. They asphalted it.
I think, I forget if it was you that told me, but, so city staff, Jack and his team, said that, that there's 50,000 vehicle trips on that road a day. Pavers aren't really meant for that kind of traffic.
No,
So,
they're not. Well, you can see that in the
I
rest
mean,
of the road.
it looks nice and it works in your driveway,
Yeah.
but 50,000 vehicle trips a day
Yeah.
going over, some bricks.
Well, I found out who liked them. Desmond liked them.
Yeah.
Desmond wanted them to go back. Staff said it doesn't make sense. It's not, and so did Malone when I talked to him about it here. That makes sense.
No,
Great
it-
Not
idea.
for a prime arterial.
Yeah.
Anyhow, okay. Good job, staff, again. We do nothing but good jobs, most of the time.
Most of them.
I'm not done, so hold that thought.
Okay, yeah.
So the last aspect of the asymmetric risk factors is CREW, which is an evaluation of management. So they will review our practices, our policies, and our procedures. And again, even if we have good, prudent management in place, we should be doing that. There's no extra points. But if we don't,
Right.
no points taken away. So all that being said, how is Vallecitos doing? Our current rating is AA plus. So Fitch came in 2015 for that bond issuance. They came back in 2017 and did a surveillance. They reaffirmed the AA plus rating, and then they gave us a rating outlook of stable. And they specifically mentioned a strong financial profile, an improved supply position with the desal purchases, consistent rate recovery, low direct debt burden, and a solid service area. So just to give you an idea of where AA plus stands, it's just below the best you can get. So it's a very good credit rating.
That'll be the one, I'll leave it like
Yep, living in as
The
triple.
AAA.
The gold standard, or no, they're not.
Plastic standard.
Their rates are higher than ours too.
that.
So all that being
Just
said,
an
what does it
editorial comment.
Sorry.
what does it mean? We have strong management in place, a strong board. We have a solid customer base and sound financials. So there's nothing in our picture to suggest that we're at risk of losing that credit.
What would the difference be if we went out for another bond now? Roughly, what would the difference be between a AAA and a AA plus in percentage rate?
That's a good question. We can look that up.
Yeah, that's one of those things, I don't think there's an easy formula. It says if you're a double A, you get 4%, and if you're a triple A, you get 3%. You know, they just don't do it that way.
We just, AAA has to nail all the aspects of what he just talked about. So we have to have great ratings, we'd have to have, as far as like setting our rates, we'd have to have a great debt service coverage, great days in cash. Management would have to be stellar. All the AAA's.
Probably need better board members.
So when the PERS thing hits, that's this year it's gonna hit? Yeah?
Phases
Yeah,
in.
1920.
Yeah.
That's when it's gonna phase in.
Okay. Next fiscal year.
When that hits, it's gonna show as a debt on our books.
It already does.
Already does.
It already does. In our financial statements, note 5, it's actually in the long-term debt section at $15.2 million right now.
What's gonna hit is the repayment schedule for the unfunded accrued liability.
Okay, so if we pay that off,
Mhm.
then we're gonna go up to AAA.
Well,
I
maybe
You can't guarantee that.
because then also your
Don't swing at the low ball.
no,
your days will go down, and your days in cash, and then your total reserves will go down. So that the other things that they rate you on too would also go
Right,
down.
no, I understand that, but the reserves were 22. Last time you did a full-blown look at us, and our reserves are much higher without that much added debt.
So you're gonna have
Never
impacts,
added debt.
exactly like Director Stone was saying, you have
Yeah.
impacts, negative impacts on certain aspects of your rating criteria, and you're gonna have positive on others. So it could just leave you where you are, it could degrade it, it could increase it, we really wouldn't know.
But that's something we could probably reach out to the rating agencies and say, hey, we're contemplating doing this, how would that affect our rating? Would that be a
Well,
good thing
yeah,
or a bad
and-
thing?
And then what would the difference be between a AA plus and an A? And is it worth our while to
Right,
worry
right.
about that rather than not pay 7%
Yeah,
a month
Right.
on an ungodly number?
it might save you 1/4% of interest, and is that worth it?
Yeah, that'll be the question at the time, right? Which you have to figure out.
Okay. So if we look at that and we said in as if we were to say AA plus down to AA is 1/4% for interest, but we're saving 7% versus our 4.6 or 1.93 that we're earning,
Right.
is it worth it?
Right. So at the time, will that come about in 2020 or 2019?
1920, so next fiscal year. We'll have to make the first payment July 2020.
And
Right.
just out of
2019,
curiosity the first payment July 2020,
Actually, 2019, sorry.
how much is that?
What was it, 953,000?
Yeah, mid-90s.
Like
Yeah.
953,000.
950,000
Let's say 950,000
a
Year.
a year.
year.
It actually goes up after that though.
But you pay it monthly, you pay it yearly,
You're okay.
so you don't have to pay the interest
You got it.
the entire year.
Right. And I think we saved $25,000 to $30,000 by paying it up front.
Cool.
Great.
Good
thank you.
presentation.
Excellent
And
presentation.
then just to, you have to have a speaker on this maybe, but,
Yeah,
we're not considering going out for a bond, this is strictly just informational for the board, as a finance committee.
Correct.
Yep.
Because we talk about the rating criteria all the time, we just
Yep.
wanted to give you an educational piece.
Cool.
Hansaki,
That's
you
good.
wanted to say something, we don't have oral communication, but we'll do it now.
Well,
We'll
that's
do
it.
the work part now. Do
It's
we
at
have
the
one?
bottom of the, it's right back. It's at the end of the.
I'll wait.
Oh, you wanna wait?
He has to speak on number 2.
Right, number 2.
Yeah,
yeah.
before we move
And then
on.
public comment is the
Okay.
last.
Okay,
Oh,
yep,
okay.
okay.
Good.
Okay, thank you very much.
So we're ready for item 2?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so this has to do with the EWA restitution, well, the Diamond Environmental Services restitution that we got. I think the number was 637,000, is that what it was, roughly? So that was, the court ordered the restitution, it was paid to EWA. EWA took an item to their board and agreed that all those money should come to Vallecitos, so they forwarded all that money to us, and I think we got that back in July, I wanna say, June, late June, early July. And we received that $637,000, and all we did was put it in reserves. So this item.
Did we call Fitch and tell him?
No, we didn't. Make a note. So this is in front of the committee to see if the committee has any thoughts and recommendations on what we should do with that money. Couple ideas just for consideration. One is to address the PERS liability, whether it be the Vallecitos employees' PERS liability or the PERS liability we have as being a member agency of the Encino Wastewater Authority.
What are those amounts again, roughly?
So the unfunded accrued liability for our share of the EWA PERS liability is about $3 million, I think, a little over $3 million. And our amount for the Vallecitos employees is 17-ish, what's the number?
It's gonna be 17.4, I believe, and when we roll it up for GASB 68.
Yeah, so combined 20 million plus or minus of unfunded accrued liability for PERS, and this is $637,000.
What the stock market is doing right now with PERS money is a good thing for us. Is that gonna change that number, make it a little bit less, or not very much?
Looked at less than that.
So with what it's doing right now, I mean, I think it's gone down a little bit since last year. It was 11% is what they said they returned last year. So it's probably gone down from there, but the net pension liability depends on so many other actuarial assumptions. It's hard to kind of forecast where it might go for next year, even with strong earnings.
And they also smooth it out over a couple of years too,
Yeah.
so even if you have one great year that's 20% return, they don't say, okay, we're gonna lower your rate
Right.
half of that. They smooth it out over a 20 or 30 year.
But they did do that years ago, and they gave refunds out.
Yeah, when they were
Which
super
many-
funded.
many
Yeah.
years.
Before
And the
2013, probably, way back then.
And the super funding came back to all the PERS people, and who knows what to do with it at that point.
They changed plans, a lot of them. Some of them bought years because they had that ability.
Has the EWA board made a decision on what they're gonna do?
I don't believe so. So there was a point in time where they said the EWA, the PERS liability really belongs to the member agencies, and they were looking to the member agencies to satisfy their obligations. So they're basically looking to us for $3 million. They went through a few iterations, and their legal advisor informed them that they could treat it as it doesn't have to be passed on to the member agency. So they could carry it on their books and just work it into rates. Last I heard, they hadn't decided, unless you guys, I don't know if you've heard different, whether they're gonna work that $3 million into rates or resolve it in some other way. They did go out and meet with the agencies and individually, and I was at the Vallecitos meeting, and we told them we'd prefer to repay that over a period of time. That was before they said that they can continue to carry it on their books. So since they've made that decision that they can carry it on their books, I haven't seen it at the EWA board
But
meeting.
if they do carry it on their books, it's gonna cost us a lot more money.
Right, it's gonna be just an
Which is our
operating
customers.
expense for them that they're gonna distribute based on ownership percentage at EWA, and we'll get a portion of that, but it's gonna be at that 7.25% interest
Right.
rate. Right. They will offer us the ability to, if we wanna retire our portion of it, and let's say Vista or Carlsbad or somebody else doesn't, I think we would still have that option. They will track them separately. So I think those are two viable options. Another is we can just do nothing, just keep the money in the reserves and just treat it like any reserves. So it's good, it's an infusion of almost $640,000, but it doesn't have to be earmarked for anything in particular.
Well,
You could also use it as a rate stabilization fund. You can create a side fund and says, hey, let's put this aside so that in the event that we think wastewater rates are gonna have to go up in the future, we can use that as a rate stabilization fund to keep the rate increases down or at zero, depending on.
I think that's great that we got this money back and we were owed it because our customers have paid it into you for all this. A question I had, and I know that some agencies have them, and they put them in strategic locations where they have actual sensors on the sewer caps,
Smart covers.
because there's probably, I don't know, probably 100 people that do this stuff in our county. And they're all probably doing the same thing to some degree. And I will tell you that the other day, Saturday night, I got a little bit late and I was coming home, and I turned and came down Mission. At the same time, there's this big tanker truck next to me, just a silver tanker truck with no name on it whatsoever, and it was pulling in the Diamond Environmental. Now, was it maybe a tank that's supplying them or something? I doubt it in the middle of the night. So I'm just saying, I think this is an ongoing process. I'd like to see us at least look into what other districts have done, and in key locations, which are mostly, not residential, but mostly industrial areas or light industrial areas that nobody's around at night.
Right.
Would be the obvious place for someone that was gonna illegally dump, to dump. Not that we would catch them dumping with the alarm, but you would know it was happening. Then you could do something else about it, you know, it's plan B. But, you know, we would catch, someone would have the alarm button with them on one of the 4 trucks that are out there constantly all night long. Someone would have that button, and at least know that, hey, this sewer got popped open, or that sewer got popped open. I wouldn't want to go chase down the person doing it, I'm just saying, just so we have a handle and know that, yeah, it's going on.
Yeah.
And then we can work on another remedy for it, but I just think it does happen fairly frequently.
Right.
And it's not just Diamond, I think there's a lot of small companies that do it. Like I said, seeing that truck with this, and then I just said, oh, I'd love to go back and take pictures, but I'm not gonna do that. Hey, the guy might be really big and I'm old.
So one of the solutions is called Smart Cover, and we do have some smart covers deployed in our service area. It's just a device that sits underneath the manhole cover, and it has an antenna that sticks out to broadcast a signal. We use them for high flows. So Smart Cover will do a couple of things. One, it sends down like an ultrasonic wave, hits the water surface, bounces back up, measures the depth, and we establish certain operating parameters. And if it's within the parameters, it doesn't send an alarm. But if there's a blockage downstream and it starts to rise in the manhole, it'll send you an alert that says, hey, you need to respond to something. The other aspect they have is what's called an intrusion alert. If somebody opens the manhole lid, it'll send an alert, say, hey, manhole number whatever is open.
Right.
And if you're the guy working on it, you say, yeah, I know, and you just cancel the alert. If
Right.
you're not, it's like, hey, nobody's out there, and it could be exactly what you're talking about. Whether
Yeah.
it's illegal dumping or whatever
Or
nefarious.
whatever it may
purposes.
be, but I just, you know, at least take some of that money and put some of it into security.
Yeah.
Because that's where we're getting it back from the lack of security that we haven't had.
Yeah.
Or oversight when it was being built. Because I understand that part in his actual business was built that way.
Okay.
I'd love to find out where he got the knowledge how to do whatever he did. But I'll never find that out.
Another option is to invest, this is a slightly different area, but invest in like a septage receiving facility. So I always like to give businesses the benefit of the doubt, and most people want to do the right thing. I think what happens is it's too difficult to do the right thing and too expensive in some cases. So all these operators, these 100 or whatever operators that are collecting septage, The only place in the whole county that they can legally discharge it is down in National City. So if you're collecting in North Twin Oaks Valley and you gotta drive all the way down to National City, that's a deterrent. So is there, or should there be, a North County location? And could that money be used to study whether we wanted to start that? Now, you may recall that the Encino Wastewater Authority looked into this, and as a whole, the member agencies, it had to be a unanimous vote, they did not want to get into the business of it. That didn't mean that any of their member agencies couldn't get into the business of it. So
Is it potentially revenue producing?
it's potentially revenue producing. EWA actually looked at the study, did a study on this, and what their study said is that if you restricted it just to the defined service boundaries of EWA, there's probably not a big enough customer base. If you wanted to go outside our service area, there is, and it makes sense. And that's where it broke down. Some of the EWA member agencies didn't want to expand the service area and go outside the service area. So they voted no, and effectively killed the project. So if Vallecitos wanted to do it as a standalone member agency project, I don't think the study would change. We'd still need to enlarge the service area, and we'd have to find out from the other member agencies, can we now allow septage into our system, the Vallecitos system, that ultimately flows into the EWA system. But there's a study, and there's money that's required. This would be a potential source of funding to do the study. But then if the study said, yeah, there's a market, then you'd have to look at the capital facilities.
There's a few things that I would say about it from a finance point of view. Well, from the board point of view. And I talked to Mr. Hernandez about this a couple of weeks ago, or a week ago. And I said, I give it a lot of thought, and I want you to know I give it a lot of thought, but, San Marcos doesn't want to be the septic capital of San Diego County either. We closed a dump 25 years ago against the county because we didn't want to be the waste trash business and have all those trucks running over our roads. So you have a lot of septic trucks running around. There will be spills that will happen, but even though I thought about it, I said, here's a possible answer, and I found that it couldn't be. A possible answer is if you talk to Dion, he builds it, he finances it 100%, and he builds it down at Meadowlark, and they can pull in the Meadowlark, dump it, pull out a Meadowlark. Well, then I found out that Meadowlark's not big enough.
Yeah.
They could kill our plant. It would kill the bugs, especially what they put in it. And some companies would probably put nuclear waste in it if they could. Don't know which ones they would be, but I personally would be against doing any type of septic in town. I think the city would be against it, and I think it'd be a real black eye to Vallecitos to try to do it. Because I think the town will get up in arms going, we're going to bring water to our town? And for how much money? And do we want to invest our money in that? I don't know. My opinion would be no, but that's one person.
Yeah, and I would suggest we wouldn't want to be investing in the infrastructure required, and you may be able to get some private equity people or a public-private partnership that they would actually construct the facilities, but it doesn't address some of the other issues you brought up about the number of trips.
Well, the only place we have to do is right in the middle of downtown, lift station too. You really can't do it on your stream going down Palmer Airport Road. There's no real place to have trucks pull in and pull out. And you're going to have spills. I mean, it's going to happen. It just does. Just like Middlelock does have escaping
Fugitive odors.
fugitive odors. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's going to be fugitive. So why do we want to do that? And I'm sorry, but for businesses that decide to build widgets, and then there's no market for a widget, it's not Vallecitos' problem. They were big boys when they got in the business, and they should have known what their costs were, and instead of deciding in their minds that we're going to make all the people of San Marcos pay for this instead of us, and we're going to divert and do something very illegal, which is exactly what happened. They knew what it was going to cost them when they opened the doors. Any good business person would, so they chose not to do that. And the other companies had a choice too. If you don't want to pay the price, don't go into business. Find someone else to do your
How many
choice.
sewer customers do you have?
20,000?
Yeah, with the IDA, 21
Yeah.
thousand.
Okay. Is one option, and I'm not necessarily advocating for this, I'm just spitballing here as we spitball, is to take the 600,000, divided by 21,000.
30 bucks.
Is it $30? Oh, yeah.
30 and change.
It would cost us more than $30 to give it back to them.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's why it may
You see
be,
those numbers already happening, people
Yeah.
find it
Yeah.
already.
that's why it may be
Yeah.
easier to treat it on the back end instead of direct, just keep it as a, like a rate stabilization. So
Yeah.
instead of raising rates, we can keep them
Yeah.
artificially
It
low.
cost us
say.
more than $30 just to give them back $30. So.
Yeah.
Okay. Never mind.
50 a month.
And then you always run into the issue of a new customer and he didn't pay into it. The old guy that moved out
Yeah.
did, and tracking them down.
Yeah.
It's very difficult. So.
And that PERS liability is gonna be a big nut for us to crack.
Yeah,
Both of them.
I mean, right
Yeah.
now, I tend to agree with Director Martin about the septic stuff, but, also, I think for right now, let's just leave it parked and, we got, some, kind of master planning coming up and maybe there might, something might come out of that where
Yeah.
we might be needing some money to research some stuff and so, and then, when we do cross the pension liability, bridge, then we can, if the money's parked there, we can talk about that then too,
Yep.
that's an option, so.
Yeah, it's because it's just commingled with all the other funds. There's not a separate fund in our reserves that has 637,000. It's all part of it, but.
Right.
Yeah, and it's collecting a little bit of interest while it's
Yeah.
sitting there.
And as we go into the next year,
1.92%.
as we go into the next budgeting process, we can remind the whole board that we got the 637, and we may ask for a specific direction, and then we can pass along what the finance committee's recommendation is.
Cool.
No urgency.
All right. We got a speaker on this one?
Yes, we do, Ms. Tonsacker.
Yeah. You mentioned the restitution is based on percentage of ownership in EWA, as far as what we get.
Well-
Is that a blended ownership?
Well, when you say that the restitution wasn't calculated as a percentage of ownership.
No, I'm saying, you mentioned it was based on percentage of ownership in EWA capacity.
That's
I
how
assume that's a blended capacity.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And when did phase 5, when was that completed?
10 years ago?
How much?
10 years ago, I want to say.
Phase 5?
Yeah,
And
maybe 6. I don't know. It's somewhere in that
It was
range.
2012.
Yeah.
and
Maybe
when-
yeah, they started it probably about 10 years ago.
I believe you mentioned there was some requirement to true up our percentages based on usage factors. Can you remember that?
I don't recall saying that. What do you mean?
Well, I understood we had to buy some other capacity or something because of our growth.
I don't recall saying that here. I mean, we have an ownership capacity at EWA for solids handling, for liquids handling, and for ocean outfall.
Yeah.
And those are all dependent. Your ownership is based on how much you want to ultimately own, and then your operating costs are on how much you're actually using the facilities, not your ownership rate. So there's two different things that they look at when they prepare the billings. We will have to buy additional solids handling, at least our master planning projections are that we'll have to buy.
That's in the master urban plan or the master water plan?
Yeah, it's in the master plan. The sewer portion of the master plan will identify how much additional solids treatment capacity we'll need at the Encino Wastewater Authority. We don't do any solids treatment at Meadowlark, so all the solids that come in have to go to Encino for treatment.
Now, the master water plan for 2014, now renamed 2018, mentioned that, well, it was the old urban master water plan that mentioned that there was figures used in the draft master water plan that were used to project needs and wants, whatever. So there is a draft that was used as a reference,
Right.
and that's discoverable. And I'd like to see that draft.
Of the master
water
plan? Okay, not the urban, are you talking about the urban water management
No.
plan or the draft version of the master master plan?
Urban.
Okay,
No,
Um,
the master water plan.
yeah.
That was supposed to be out 2 years ago.
Yeah, and it's under review right now, and I'll check with James and see the status of our district engineer.
Well, I'd like to see whatever you got. And did we ever build any more ocean disposal capacity?
No.
No. Okay, thank you.
Do you have something on the oral as well, Mr. Hunsaker?
I'm gonna hold off
But we're
for
done.
now.
Oh, but I think we're closing up, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's done.
Oh, you're just done.
I've got
Oh.
another meeting, so.
Oh, I thought you were waiting until the next.
I was
We're gonna
waiting
adjourn here pretty soon.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks for coming.
All right. Any suggestions, recommendations for future items, items of compelling interest? Otherwise, we'll scan the horizon.
Would it be very difficult to, it was under an older regime, would it be very difficult to find out what our electric bill is at our different facilities? Because I assume we have many meters, because every pump, is that something that's already
Yep.
in one of your 2 million
I
numbers
do that,
there?
I did it for each of the pump zones plus all of our major facilities. Now there's like 20 or so that are only $50 a month. I didn't even look at those, but the
Right.
big ones I
Yeah.
have, it's been updated, it hasn't been updated for 6 to 8 months,
Okay.
and
Like,
but I
does
do
this
have
facility just have one?
this facility
And then probably one for the workshop?
probably just
and
has
back?
one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, I would just, if it's easy to put that together, I'd love to see one of those, just out of curiosity. Because it is a big cost that we do, and I'm just curious as to, well.
the
pump
data would be
stations-
about 6 to 8 months old if that's okay.
That's
because
fine.
it would take, I mean, I could do it if that's your direction.
6 or 8 months is fine. Yeah,
Okay.
No, don't need to rework the world, it's just something simple, and if you already did it, that's great, I didn't know you'd done that.
Yeah, I'll get something for Glenn to disseminate then.
Thank you, sir, appreciate that. Well, it's easy to do, I don't wanna create any
Yep.
work that you guys have enough to do. Well, with all that said, I think, thank you very
Move
much
to
for
adjourn.
adjourning the meeting.
All right.
Thanks, guys.